Hello and welcome to Improving Scottish Football. My name is Kieran, and today on the podcast, I'm joined by Stephen McGowan, who is the chief football writer for the Scottish Daily Mail. The episode is a bit of a banger, if I do say so myself. Stephen is going to be answering the question, are the SPFL and the SFA fit for purpose? You know, are they driving Scottish football forward? So first and foremost, we're going to clear up what they do, how they operate, and how the voting system works. We are going to discuss how the power dynamics work in Scottish football and why certain clubs may or may not have more influence than others. And we're going to talk about the TV deal and discuss what is preventing us from getting a better one. Now, since it's coming up for Christmas, I would actually like to ask you guys for a present. And that present is ideally a 5-star review. You don't even have to write anything. You just have to click the 5 stars on whatever podcast platform you use. It is the season to be nice and charitable, and you would make me a very happy man this Christmas. Let's keep this going. Let's improve Scottish football. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the podcast. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Stephen McGowan. Stephen, how are you?
Yeah, good, Kieran. Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to have you. Can we start out by you giving us a brief introduction to yourself and obviously your connection to Scottish football?
My name is Stephen McGowan. I'm Chief Football Writer of the Scottish Daily Mail. I have been in sports journalism in Scotland for some considerable time, for 30 years, from 1993, in fact, when I started out with DC Thompson. I've been with the Scottish Daily Mail for 23 years. I've been Chief Football Writer for the last 12 years. And I've seen a few off the premises, and I've seen a few come as well. So, never a dull moment.
No, so you've been there, seen it, done it. 30 years,
I guess. It does feel that way. Yes.
Yeah. 30 years is obviously, quite a long time in Scottish football, I guess. A lot has changed. Well, actually, I tell a lie. Probably not a lot has really changed that much. If anything, we've kind of, I don't know how you feel about this, but I guess looking at the 90s, the early 2000s, that was a time when Scottish football was, at least respected in world football. And probably since then, we've stood still in a lot of other leagues like England have obviously pulled away, and a lot of our peer leagues and peer countries are kind of moving past us. I don't know how you kind of reflect on that period that you've covered Scottish football.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look back even to the year when I went into journalism, 93, I mean, Celtic hadn't won the league for 5 years. They were heading for financial disaster. Rangers, meanwhile, were pretty much reaching the Champions League semi-final, where, if you remember, they lost to Marseille, who were slightly discredited, the Bernard Tapie era thereafter. But yeah, I mean, we were still relatively close, quite a golden era, what I consider a golden era of Scottish football, where between 1980 and 1985, you had 3 different teams winning the league: Celtic, Dundee United, Aberdeen. 1986, Hearts were only 7 minutes away from doing the same at Love Street. It was a really golden, rich era for the game. And yeah, you had Aberdeen win a European trophy. You had Dundee United reach the European Cup semi-final. 1987, they were very unlucky not to beat Gothenburg in the UEFA Cup final. And then we go to Rangers in 93. And okay, we've had sporadic periods since where Celtic have reached UEFA Cup final 2003. Rangers have reached 2. But yeah, you do feel, I think, that the financial gulf has grown so much between Europe and between Scottish football. But Scottish football hasn't done itself too many favours, because we're talking about a competition where no team out with Glasgow has won the league since 1985, and that can't be healthy.
No. So a lot of this podcast, we're going to be talking about the SPFL and the SFA. And I guess a big question on a lot of fans' minds is, are they fit for purpose? And are they working in a way that is really driving Scottish football forward? So if you don't mind, can you give us a bit of an introduction to both the SPFL and the SFA and just lay it out for us in terms of what each body actually looks after and how they actually operate, in terms of voting structures and all that sort of stuff?
I think that would be something that really should be compulsory education for all Scottish football fans, because the amount of times you see people getting the SPFL and SFA confused in terms of their duties. They're going on to slaughter a decision by the SPFL and they criticise the SFA. So that's quite common. The SFA are there for the governance, the overall governance of Scottish football, to look after the welfare and the well-being of the game. They handle all of the professional game, the grassroots game. They look after the Scotland national team. They handle the Scottish Cup. They look after facilities and investment and discipline and registration of players and, of course, referees. The SPFL are there to administer the league. The SPFL is a fairly recent being from 2013. Before then, the Scottish Football League, the old Scottish Football League, was in charge until 1998, where it was a breakaway of the top teams. Fergus McCann, David Murray, Jim McLean, and so on formed the Scottish Premier League, 1998, which was there to emulate almost the English Premier League. And the Scottish Football League still worked in tandem to handle the lower leagues. I think it was only 2013 where the two merged, and Neil Doncaster became the great godfather of Scottish football in terms of the league setup anyway. And now we have the SPFL and our current guys who oversee all of the league setup and the league pyramid.
And what do you say to people who criticise the SPFL and the SFA? Can you understand that a lot of fans get very frustrated? And I'm sure you probably yourself as a fan get frustrated by a lot of aspects of either the SPFL or SFA. Can you understand that criticism, or is there another side to the story that we need to hear?
Of course, I think you understand the criticism. Of course you do. If you go back to where we started this conversation about the decline of Scottish football in general, well, effectively, that has to be laid at the door of the SFA and the SPFL. But yeah, that's true to an extent. But to me, the clubs get far too easy a ride. I mean, ultimately, the SFA and the SPFL are member organisations, and the members are the clubs. They are the shareholders. So when supporters say, the SFA this and the SPFL that, that's a ridiculous decision. Well, actually, most of that is set in place by the clubs who have created the voting structure, have created this situation where they effectively run the show. Take, for example, Neil Doncaster. Neil Doncaster, maybe his job title may be Chief Executive of the SPFL, but he's neither chief or executive. In effect, Neil Doncaster is a civil servant. He's there to do the bidding of the clubs. And yeah, you hear it quite often. He's there to do the bidding of certain clubs, big clubs. Well, that's how football and how power works. Seferin of UEFA does the bidding of Bayern Munich and Barcelona and Man United and Chelsea. And, you have a hierarchy, you have a food chain, you have a power structure. The most powerful voices in the room are the loudest voices who have the most sway. And that's no different in Scottish football, where Celtic and Rangers bring in so much of the commercial revenue, so much of the commercial value. And I accept that's really difficult for other people to understand. But effectively, Neil Doncaster would be the first to tell you he's there to serve the clubs. And Ian Maxwell really is no different than the SFA. I think we hear quite often about the SFA as SFA, burn the Blazers, burn them down, rip it up, start again. I just find that stuff utterly bewildering and baffling. What does it even mean? I mean, how would you do that? Would you sack everybody en masse? And who would you put in charge that Scottish football fans would actually trust anyway? I mean, the SFA has a board. It's an ever-changing board. For example, in June, the president, Mike Mulvaney, took over from Rod Petrie. Now, you can say the president should be elected. It's not really a proper election. But the president changes, it serves 2 terms of 4 years, and the board is ever changing. So the people are changing all the time. The SFA does evolve, the SFA does change. I think we just find it quite often it doesn't change to the liking of fans of individual clubs.
I think that kind of burn the Blazers sort of approach is probably more of a, well, the way I understand it is it's just like an old boys club. And yeah. I'm not saying that specifically about the SFA or SPFL. Yeah. I think this happens a lot in Scottish and British organisations in general. You see it in other industries, and you certainly see it at club level as well. So I'm not saying that this is specifically SFA, SPFL, but I think it's that old white male, that lack of diversity, the old school thinking when it comes to football. So I think a lot of people just get frustrated by the lack of new voices and new ideas, and because football is changing so rapidly. There's so much innovation and progression in certain countries, and we are, still operating in a bit of an old school way.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand where people are coming from with that. But equally, I think it's naive to think that the clubs and the people in charge have not thought of alternative strategies. Take TV deals, for example. People say, well, it should have gone out to tender. They should have accepted bids from other people. And yeah, I get that. I understand it. I think it's naive to think they wouldn't be aware if there were great big broadcasting organisations out there who were interested in Scottish football. I just think I think the problem is that the people at the top of the organisation are quite aloof and distant from the fans. The fans don't really know them. They don't meet them. I've had the pleasure or the privilege or the curse, if you like, of meeting all of them. And I see them as smart, intelligent guys. Mike Mulvaney's the SFA president. I mean, he's a highly successful man with a wide range of business interests. He's not an idiot. But people, I think, quite often, because they don't know them, they don't personalise them, they don't humanise them, just assume that these are bowling club buffoons. I can only give you my experience. That's not really my experience. I find intelligent men who do think through the options. The problem is that you have a Scottish football organisation, a body, if you like, where you have Celtic and Rangers at the very top, and you have Albion Rovers, Stenhousemuir, Edinburgh City, East Fife, and what have you at the bottom. It's very difficult to bridge the gap or to meet the interests of those incredibly big clubs and also meet the interests of clubs who really are right at the bottom of the pyramid or the senior leagues. It's very difficult to bridge that gap to square the circle. And I think that's one of the biggest problems, is that it just can't be done.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, how can we do it?
I don't. I mean, I do. I mean, I understand that fans get very frustrated. It's all about the big clubs and what have you. I don't think it can be done.
But
I don't think it can be done.
I guess one of my big issues is I don't think it's serving Celtic and Rangers overly well. Really, that's the thing. If Celtic and Rangers were making huge strides in the Champions League, we're really driving forward. But the problem is, they're not achieving what these clubs should achieve, because they are incredible football establishments that should be, at the elite table of world football. And so I guess my opinion is that in almost catering to Celtic and Rangers too much, it's not actually overly healthy for them. And maybe there's a different approach whereby, a rising tide lifts all ships. And by focusing on Scottish football as a whole and all the clubs, and trying to somehow raise the standard of all the clubs, all the leagues.
Yeah, see, I get that, and I understand it, I sympathise with it. The problem is, how do you actually do that? What I mean by that is that when the Scottish Premier League came into being in 1998, in effect, that was giving the power to the clubs. And that's replicated all across world football. The biggest clubs retain all the power because they retain all the economic value. So how do you say to Celtic and Rangers, we want you to sacrifice more prize money. We want you to be more of a kind of socialist cooperative, if you like. How do you say to them, make a sacrifice for the greater good? Because all Celtic and Rangers are thinking about is, what's in it for us? And that's no different to the other clubs, effectively, is it really? Everyone's looking out for number one. That's always been one of the great kind of frustrations about Scottish football, is that self-interest tends to proliferate and dominate. I just don't know how you change that as long as club power is there. It goes back to my point about Neil Doncaster. He can't, for example, Stuart Regan, for example, was the SFA chief executive. He tried to impose himself, and he upset the clubs with that. And he didn't last very long after it. They waited their time, they waited to the Michael O'Neill fiasco, and then they picked him off because he made enemies, because he tried to change things. The secret to the longevity of guys like Neil Doncaster and Ian Maxwell, if they want to keep their jobs, they do what the big clubs tell them. And whereas I sympathise with your point of view that I agree, we need to try and make things better for the greater good. How do you do that? How do you dictate to Celtic and Rangers that they should give up more? Why should they give up more for, I'm just saying from their perspective, why should they give up more for Hearts and Aberdeen if they think they're not being run terribly well? If they think they're appointing bad managers and wasting their money, they'll find it difficult to make the case for them giving up their ill-gotten gains or hard-gotten gains rather for other clubs who they think probably should do better. So it's a very difficult thing to enact if you kind of see where I'm coming from with this.
Yeah, no. I totally get it as well. The voting structure in the SPFL is a big bugbear for a lot of people. So in order to actually make any change, it's 11 clubs out of 12 that have to vote something through. I thought I'd check what the English system was, and it turns out that it's only 14 out of 20 that need to vote something through. So when you compare England, it's only 70% of clubs that need to be in favour of something, and we're over 90%. Do you think the voting system at least needs to change? And if so, how do you actually change the voting system?
Well, there was a chance. There was a chance there to change it. There was a chance there to change it when Rangers were in the lower leagues, and during that period, Aberdeen and Celtic formed a bit of a new firm, if you like. And Stuart Milne, the chairman of Aberdeen, I think had the opportunity to vote with the other clubs to effectively isolate Celtic, and chose not to do it. I'm not just pinning that on Stuart Milne, but I think there was a widespread perception there that the opportunity was there at that time. I think it would have been a fear of Celtic, actually. At that point, the other 11 clubs could have ganged up and they could have said, you know what we want? We want a playoff at the end of the season. The way Belgium does, for example, instead of just the team finishes first, we want a playoff system where, sudden death games, 2 legs, whatever, and made it more difficult for Celtic to win the league. They didn't do it. They had the opportunity then to get rid of 11-1, and they didn't take it for whatever reason, whoever is to blame. So 11-1 is a source of frustration, as is the fact that some issues are not 11-1. For example, at the moment, we have the debate over artificial surfaces in the Premiership. And people think it's simple. If Livingston get relegated, then the other 11, Kilmarnock are the only ones left. They'll be ripping their pitch up, so we'll get rid of these plastic pitches. Well, it's not that simple, because the artificial surfaces, for example, I think it's a 9-3 issue, actually. So you need, just looking at this, you need any vote would require 75% of the Premiership, 75% of the Premiership and the Championship combined, then 75% of the entire SPFL combined to get artificial pitches out. And if you look at all the teams in the lower leagues who have artificial pitches, that's never going to pass. So you have this immense frustration, with the 11-1, and there's also a great frustration at the top level as well amongst the Premiership clubs about this one club, one vote, that they can affect, that the wishes of Celtic and Rangers, the biggest, most powerful clubs in the country, can be totally defied over B teams, league reconstruction, artificial pitches, whatever you care to mention, by Stenhousemuir, by East Fife, by Airdrie. They don't think that's particularly fair. So there is widespread discontent over the voting structure. It's not just a case of everybody saying 11-1 favours the old firm. The old firm don't like it either. And that I think that is a big threat now, is that at some point frustration will spill over and you'll have a breakaway within a breakaway. That you will have Premier League clubs saying, you know what, we'll go full-time clubs and they'll dump the part-time clubs and leave them behind.
Oh, really?
I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I think that threat has been, shall we say, made in a veiled fashion in the past when the top clubs have not really been getting their way. And I don't know what will be destroyed, will break the camel's back. But you have maybe, I don't know, if I talk of SPFL 2 in the past, for example, I mean, I think you could probably get up 18 to 20 full-time teams in Scotland and then form a breakaway league, and then they could take the Sky money. And I think that is a threat that's regularly wielded in the path of the lower league clubs when they frustrate the Premiership clubs.
How do we change the voting structure to make it something that would allow for changes to be made? Is there, I mean, how did that 11-1 vote come along when Aberdeen had the option to change things. Was that who actually brought that to the table?
You're asking me to go down for a history lesson there, and I can't. It's all a bit vague now. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, the only way you change it is if the clubs vote to change it.
Yeah.
The clubs have the power, so you need the clubs to vote for a change.
Yeah, because I guess this is it. It's like, if the general consensus is, let's just take a topic like league reconstruction. Let's say that, the vast majority of clubs are all in favour of league reconstruction and all of the fan base is in favour of league reconstruction. We effectively just have to wait until 11 out of the 12 Premiership clubs agree that that is a good thing to do, right?
No, I think for league reconstruction, no. I think for league reconstruction again, same as artificial pitches, it would be 75% of the Premiership, 75% of the Premiership and Championship, and 75% of the entire SPFL.
Okay.
That's a very hard thing to deliver. It's a very hard thing to deliver to get the votes. It's why it's hard to change anything in Scottish football, because, as I say, you have Celtic and Rangers and Hearts and Hibs and Aberdeen at this end of the spectrum, and you have the other clubs like, I keep saying Stenhousemuir because Ian McMenemy is, almost a kind of unofficial spokesman of the lower league clubs, and he won't mind me saying that. You have other clubs who have vastly different interests at the other end of the spectrum, and getting the requisite number of votes amongst the 4 senior leagues and all the clubs, 75% in effect, is very, very difficult. That's why change is so elusive in Scottish football.
And when it does come to wanting to enact some sort of change, again, I'll just pick this league reconstruction topic. When is it up to individual clubs to bring ideas to the table when it comes to, here's something we would like to change or at least talk about? Or is it up to Neil Doncaster in the SPFL to say, hey guys, here's a good idea that might benefit the leagues? What's the actual process in terms of getting clubs round a table and actually discussing the benefits and negatives of a particular topic?
Well, if you remember, after the COVID kind of fallout, if you like, with Partick, Thistle and Hearts and so on, I think there was Anne Budge came forward with some reconstruction proposals. Les Gray, former Hamilton chairman, vice chairman, came forward with some reconstruction proposals. So clubs effectively proposed them, and then they will be put to discussion, put out in a paper. There will be clubs will be asked, would you support this in principle? And if they think there's a chance of it passing, they'll have a formal vote. In that occasion, there was no consensus. And this is the repeat story in Scottish football. There's never any consensus on anything for change. That's why we're stuck where we are. And that's why I think in some respects, the only way you will get serious change is if like-minded clubs team up together. And what I mean by that is the full-time clubs who share the same interests and who might want a bigger chunk of the TV money, almost breaking away in a separate league and pursuing their own interests. And then they can ban artificial surfaces. Then they can, demand more money of the team. They can do whatever they choose to do without having lower league clubs telling them, no, you can't have your B team in the senior leagues. You can add senior, you could add senior Premiership B teams to a full-time structure because the big clubs will be in charge of the show. At the minute, they feel they're being frustrated by the lower league clubs, rightly or wrongly.
Do you think that might be a good thing, potentially, to have some sort of breakaway?
I don't know. I think it would be sad. I mean, I see clubs who do wonderful work in the community. You look at Stenhousemuir as well. I keep coming back to them, but just examples you can think of who do brilliant work in the local community in Wharton, who have like breakfast clubs at Capel and so on. And they only do that because the money is there to fund it. And effectively, the money comes from the TV deal. Now, you might say it's not a fantastic or a huge deal, but it is what it is. And it does provide valuable revenue to these clubs. And if you have a breakaway of some description, then their revenue and their income is going to be badly affected because their crowds are not terribly big. So, yeah, it would be an existential threat to a great number of community clubs. But on the other hand, Would it professionalise Scottish football? Would it end the fiasco of artificial surfaces in the Premier Division? I think it would. In my humble opinion, if you ask my opinion, I think there's a bigger picture that needs to happen here. I actually think Celtic and Rangers now are just too big for Scottish football in general. I think the structural change needs to come at a higher level. I think it needs to be at a European level. I would personally welcome it. I know there's great opposition to a European Super League, but in essence, the Champions League is pretty much that already. So why don't we just admit it? Why don't we just face up? Why don't we just say, right, we're going to have a European league structure? Now let Celtic and Rangers play in Division 3 or wherever they qualify, and then let the Scottish clubs get on with creating a kind of competitive, exciting league. Because if you look beneath Celtic and Rangers, you have an incredibly competitive league. From Hearts to Livingston at the moment, I think there's only, 12 points or something? I can't remember, but it's extremely competitive, and maybe that would be a better spectacle for fans to watch than going to Celtic or Rangers and seeing 11 men behind the ball and a game of attack versus defence, and for my money, very little competition. So I wonder actually if it's already moved beyond the full-time teams in Scottish football breaking away, whether actually we're looking more at kind of cross-border leagues, to be honest.
Mm. Yeah, I have to say, it was something that I was never really in favour of for many, many years. But I think recently I've kind of come around to the idea of definitely being open to it. I guess I just want to see all the Scottish clubs, together. But when you've the other clubs have had, it's been like this for so many years where there's still such a huge gap. And if there hasn't been a way of closing it by now, then I can't see how it's going to.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I think it's almost unbridgeable. And to be fair, it's not entirely a unique Scottish thing. I mean, if you look across Europe, look at Croatia, you look at Azerbaijan, you look at Germany, even France, PSG, Bayern Munich. England has got quite a competitive league, but even so, Manchester City still win the league more often than they should. I mean, you're looking across Europe and you're seeing big, powerful clubs buoyed by Champions League revenue just pulling away from the rest. It's not particularly unique to Scotland, this syndrome. I think European football is broken, generally. I think UEFA have broken it. And it probably needs some radical thinking to try and change it. So, we're talking about the SPFL and the SFA, but, they're swimming against the tide to fix Scottish football, because I think it goes above their head, to be honest.
Mm. Well, you've definitely given me the topic of a new podcast in the future. Is UEFA broken? Yeah, I'll have to do a proper deep dive. I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. Before we kind of come to the end, Stephen, I'd like to touch on the TV deal since you mentioned that a little while ago. Obviously, again, this is a huge frustration for everyone.
Yeah.
Give us your thoughts on it.
I can understand the vast frustration. I really can. Again, I take it back to the clubs. I think it depends, how your perception on it depends on how you gauge the TV deal. People look at the Netherlands, for example, getting 90 million a year and say, well, that's a comparable country, we should get the same. But for the 90 million a year, the Netherlands gives TV companies almost unbridled access to the leagues. They give them, I don't know, is it 240 games a season or something? We give 60 maximum. So if you measure it on a price per game basis, actually the SPFL will tell you that the Scottish League is making something like £440,000 a game. In Holland, because they give so many games away, it's actually about £100,000 a game. So if you measure it on that basis, you can say, well, actually, Scottish football deal is not bad. What this really comes down to is that Scottish football is disproportionately dependent at the moment on crowds and on season tickets and on fans coming through the turnstile. The fascination for me, Kieran, is, have they done their research on that? If you allowed Sky or whoever, Amazon Prime, and said to them, right, okay, we'll give you unbridled access to live games, would that make a difference? I don't know if it would, because when you get beneath game 60, I know people get frustrated. They want more Edinburgh derbies and they want more Dundee derbies and so on. I just don't know if they have the same commercial appeal for companies, you know. So it would be fascinating to see. But if at the moment you're asking TV companies to bid for a product with one hand tied behind their back, they can only show a maximum of 60 games a season, and they can only show a maximum of 5 from each home league ground. So they can only show 5 Celtic home games, 5 Rangers home games, 5 Hearts home games. And that's an immense source of frustration to fans. It causes ridiculous situations where the game of the day isn't live on TV because Sky need to keep a game back for later in the season for when the post split. You know, they can't commit themselves, you know. It creates really ridiculous anomalies. But you know what? That's not Neil Doncaster. And that's not on Sky. That is on the Premiership clubs. When fans say this is a ridiculous TV deal, go to the clubs, go to their own clubs and say, this deal's ridiculous. We need to look at this again. But unfortunately, the chairman and the chief executives have decided it's the best deal they can get.
But surely Neil Doncaster should be saying to the clubs, guys, this is not the best way to get a TV deal. Can we please, you know, open this up a little bit more to showing more live games? You know, surely he must be in dialogue with the clubs and proactively suggesting best ways that we can get a better TV deal.
You can't tell the clubs what to do. You can't. I mean, if he, you know, he very much sees his role as servant of the clubs, effectively. The clubs sit down, they discuss it. I mean, again, I go back to the point, are we really saying that the clubs haven't discussed this? I mean, they're clearly quite risk-averse. They're clearly quite conservative and cautious. They would rather go with the devil they know. I suppose, to be fair, you know, they will be looking at this guaranteed revenue for the next 5 years from Sky and saying, better the devil we know. You know, they had quite a scare during COVID. Should it have been opened up? Probably, yeah. I can understand that point of view. Would it have made any difference? I'm not convinced it would have. If you had put it out to the market, are there broadcasters working out there who secretly don't realise yet that Scottish football is the hidden gem that they want to see? Well, you've got a league that's not been won from a team outside Glasgow for 30 odd years. You know, maybe it's not the great prize that we think it is, Scottish football, but it would be interesting to open it out and see what difference it would make if you said, okay, we'll give you 240 games a season. We'll let you show any game you like from Celtic Park. I suppose the worry for Celtic and Rangers then would be, well, what impact does that have on season tickets? That's what we don't know. If Celtic allow all the TV companies to show their games, does that mean that 10,000 people fall off a season ticket trail? And does the TV money make that up? I don't know. They'll be doing their sums, and that's the great unknown that we don't know, Kieran.
Yeah, I mean, my personal belief is it wouldn't impact season ticket
sales.
Because
Possibly,
it's so ingrained in our DNA, and those who want to go to football matches will still go. But obviously, it's easy for me to sit here and say that.
You see that you've just hit the $1 million question there. It's one which we really need an answer to. You know, fans can say, yeah, we would still go, but we heard all that before. We heard all that when when the whole Rangers thing was going on in 2012. You know, we'll turn up for games and we'll make up any revenue loss from Rangers going out of the league. Didn't always happen. So you know, it's all very well fans saying we will turn up, but the proof is in the pudding. And I suppose at the moment the clubs just have that doubt in their mind and that fear that it wouldn't happen, that season ticket sales would drop substantially, and that any revenue they would make for the TV deal wouldn't necessarily make that up. And that's a great unanswered question.
You're obviously talking about selling more games. I think a great recent example is the EFL deal. Obviously, they've 1,000 live games they've given up, and you know, we're going to get absolutely obliterated by this. You know, Scottish football is hardly even going to be seen on TV. I mean, we should be doing that. We should be giving all our matches to Sky, or at least giving them the option.
Yeah, I mean, that EFL deal was a bit of a blow to Scottish football, actually, in respect of the fact that if you remember this new TV deal, they are offering up 2 packages of 10 games for £4 million each, which Sky can take up if they so choose. I think that was basically put in place so that if Sky lost out in the EFL deal, if they didn't have as much English football to show, they could buy more Scottish football games. And now they've won the rights to the EFL. I don't think they're going to be as likely to take them up. Other companies can. They can offer that to Premier Sports. They can offer it to a newcomer if they so please. I'm sure they'll be trying to do that. But yeah, it's everywhere you turn, it's frustration, isn't it?
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, Stephen, it's been an absolute pleasure getting you on the podcast. But before I let you go, I'm going to ask the question I ask every guest, which is, if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about Scottish football, what would it be?
It would be a time machine. It would be a time machine to take us back to 1983 again, to Aberdeen winning European Cup Winners' Cup, Dundee United winning the Scottish Premier League. Celtic were relatively strong. Tough times for Rangers. They had quite a strong Hearts as well. We just had a strong competitive league. And, you know, people talk about league reconstruction and summer football and TV deals. Nothing would galvanise Scottish football more than a team outside Celtic or Rangers launching a serious challenge for the Scottish League. And Bosman's a big factor in that as well. In those days, Aberdeen, Dundee United would sign their players up to like 25-year contracts, Jim McLean in particular, and have players digging ditches. You couldn't do that these days. You just couldn't do it. You know, players have more rights now. They can leave, and Bosman freedom of contract. Clubs can't tie down teams the way they could, so it's very, very difficult for Hearts and Aberdeen and Hibs and, you know, Dundee United to build strong, coherent teams and build something. But if you were asking me the magic wand, it would be spirit us back to those days where Scottish football was just fantastic, actually. And it's like what the pros always say before a cup final. I was 12, 13 years old. I had no idea at that time that it would never be that way again. So, you know, it's quite poignant in a way, I suppose. You know, pining for childhood, but really pining for the competitive football when Aberdeen took 15,000 fans to Ibrox and Parkhead and pretty much knew they were going to win.
Mm. Oh,
I know.
You've got me reminiscing, Stephen. No, that's is there any prospect of us getting back to those days without major change happening?
No. I don't even see what change could make it happen. It would mean the reintroduction of restrictive practices, which should never be allowed under employment law now. You have to tie players down to contracts which are just, you know, wouldn't be allowed. You would need to scrap Bosman. You would have to stop Celtic and Rangers paying players £25,000 a week and have them basically paying the same as Aberdeen and Dundee United. You'd probably have an end to 60,000 season ticket holders, 50,000 at Ibrox. You'll go back to Celtic and Rangers having crowds of 18 to 20,000 in an average home game. Nah, it's not going to happen. That's a cheery way to end, isn't it?
Isn't it just? No, listen, it was great to chat through all of that with you, Stephen. And yeah, hopefully no one's too depressed after it. Because I think to be honest, we're all fundamentally aware of a lot of these issues. It's just a case of working out. I do believe there are things that we can change, even if they are small incremental changes. So it's just a case of working out how we actually try and enact that change and get the clubs persuaded to open their minds to some things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Well, listen, thanks again for coming on, Stephen. We'll maybe get you on at some point in the future if you're up for it.
Can we pick a cheerier subject if we're going to talk again?
Yeah, we can. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Stephen. And
thank you.
Thank you to everyone who was listening. This podcast was produced by Edinburgh Documentary Films, which is a film and media company co-founded by me, Kieran Hennigan. So we make documentaries for TV and cinema, but we also work with companies and brands to help them tell their stories in impactful and meaningful ways. You can find out more at edinburghdocs.co.uk, and please contact me directly if you'd like to talk about any potential projects.